Welcome back to Beneath the Grandstands. We are episode 27 and, kicking off season 2. Had our first episode of 2021 with Tinker Hatfield, Alex, a good one. Now back for another good conversation and good to see you, my friend. So how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on, man. Again, I think this is a relevant conversation with our guest today. I think the number one thing people in track and field want to talk about is broadcasts, access, ways of presentation, right? Run of show. And those are conversations that need to be had. But I think today, bringing in a different voice and a different perspective on things is relevant and worth everybody hearing. Because at the end of the day, we say things like, we're doing it for the sport. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, let's put some let's actually put some teeth to that phrase, and let's talk about what that means. And I think that's why I'm so excited to have an old friend on.
Yes. Yeah. Today's guest, Mr. John Anderson, you know him from SportsCenter on ESPN, and you also know him and how we got to know John really well was through his hosting of the Bowerman Award presentation at the end of each year, honoring the top male and female track and field athletes in the NCAA. But John has been at ESPN, you'll hear, for 22 years. And so has a wealth of knowledge, obviously, in broadcasting and journalism. Went to University of Missouri School of Journalism, a really renowned program. And so just a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, and someone that's gone from this huge network and been able to carve track and field coverage into what he does on a semi-regular basis. You see him now with kind of leading the broadcast of the New York City Marathon, SEC championships and NCAA championships, cross country even this year he added to his belt. So really, really great to have him on the show. And Alex, I know one we've been excited to talk to for quite a while. So with that said, I think we jump right into it. A lot to talk about and a lot to learn from this guy. So let's welcome him on this week's show. We'd like to welcome Mr. John Anderson to the show. And John, it's great to have you. Just to give a quick background, I feel like Alex and I probably met you the way that most of America has met you, is just like in our living rooms on SportsCenter, where we haven't really met you at all. But we were very fortunate to work alongside you and for a number of years at the Bowerman. And I'd like to say just that was always a real special moment for me. And I think I speak for Alex in saying that, just having known your work on ESPN for years, and then be able to work alongside you and especially work alongside you in the world of track and field, and just to have that relationship grow. So it's great to now have you on the show, talk to you about ESPN, but track and field and all these things that you're now involved in. So welcome.
Well, I'm glad to be here. You're very kind to say that. The Bowerman is terrific, and I have the easy part, right? Because I can have some scripted remarks. You're there winging it on the red carpet, or you get the coaches, and so now you got to be careful what you ask them, what you say, because you really want to go, aren't you glad that this guy didn't just roll in and eat $8,000 worth of grocery and never scored a point? So you've got the harder job when we go do that thing. But it's nice to be here, and I love the setup. Like, I'm twice as big as both of you guys, so that's a real ego boost as well. I look at you guys are dividing. You're having the whole thing.
I think you left one year, and I actually had to take your job at the Bowerman. So I don't know. I'd say the sideline part is a little, I'll say that's a little easier. So I appreciate that nod, but I think your job was pretty important and pretty took some time and some skill. So
well, we're fortunate.
Well, I'd love to get a little background for folks because, again, we kind of know you as a guy that's been on SportsCenter for years and been a big part of ESPN and the personalities that we get to know on TV. But how long have you been there now? Take us back to, when you got there, how you got involved, and what brought you to ESPN.
Well, I have, as the end of this month, so what are we, a couple of days shy of 22 years, which is remarkable in this business, right? From anywhere to be 22 years. I don't know, maybe being a union line worker in Detroit, 22 years seems like a long time. So I got here in 99. I had been working in Phoenix before that. Part of the subjectiveness of the business is I was in Phoenix. I had a 3-year contract. I started looking for work because at the end of those 3 years, I realized that I was not going to get renewed. We had a news director that didn't like sports, was going to win with weather in Phoenix, right? That's remarkable. Was going to win, because I forecast the weather in Phoenix. But for those that aren't up on the vernacular, if you're not going to get renewed, that's like being fired, right? That's the same thing. Everybody says, oh, there's mutual parting of the ways now, or that's the kind of the no. If you're not going to be renewed, I was going to be out of a job. So I was fortunate that I had a chance to either go home to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and go work in market, whatever it was, 98, 88, or come here. So I had to disappoint my mother and say, well, Mom, as much as I enjoy your meatloaf and lasagna, I'm going to move to Connecticut. And then I was really fortunate that this place sort of fit what I did. They are okay with me being a little off kilter. They like people that see sports perhaps just from just even a little, left of center or right of center, not to be political, but just view it from a different prism of just then, hey, see ball, pitch ball, hit ball, run scored. And so I was fortunate that worked, and the group here was great. And I've worked with decent people, and I've had some staying power. And I think the one thing that you find with any of us that have been here for a long time, and I worked with Kenny Mayne last night, even though he's ready to move on, or Steve Levy, or John Bucci-Grass, or you go back to Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann, even though they had personality and even though they had a reason to make you watch because they were compelling, never once did they look at the show and go, I'm more important than watching LeBron James dunk or Michael Jordan shoot a jump shot or Aaron Rodgers throw a touchdown pass. And I think that's always the key. I think we have people come in every once in a while, and the ones that flame out go, oh, I'm at ESPN, I'm going to be famous, this is great. And they strive for that instead of go, just be the conduit of here's what people want to see and bring it to them. And if you can bring it to them accurately and inform, and if you can elaborate a little bit and add a little spice to it, great. But mostly, don't ever forget the reason people turn on the TV, the reason they're going to turn on tonight is to see who threw a no-hitter or to see who wins that Russell Westbrook get a triple-double and see if he can get his team in the playoffs. That's why people turn on the TV. And if you start to lose sight of that main fact, then I think you get in trouble. And so I think if there's something I've done for 22 years is never try to get too much in the way of what the story is, and don't ever put the storyline in front of the punchline if you can help it.
John, I think it's so interesting you brought up, you said left of center, right? And getting out of the way a little bit, like of the actual highlight. Mm-hmm. I think that is so, and you reference some of your former colleagues and current colleagues, Bucci-Grass, Keith Olbermann. There was a tone, right? There was, and I don't want to call it a self-deprecating tone, but it's the tone that you guys were able to lean into that, I think is most like relevant and tangible, and maybe like this is SportsCenter sort of humor. There's like a slight wink and a nod and a dryness to the delivery and to maybe your generation that you pioneered. Right. And I wonder, like, is it strange to see that that's almost that kind of became the default way for, I feel like, sports broadcasters to deliver, and that your cadence and your tone was like absolutely like it spread like wildfire. And I think your team and like that humor defined what was sports broadcasting.
Yeah. And listen, I think, and this is my personality, I'm all down with snark. I'm good with it to a point. Not everybody is. But I do think people realize that there's a little more elbow room in sports than there is in other places. But I think what really helped when John Walsh, who was kind of the godfather of SportsCenter, the man who designed this thing and made it what it was, and then you get Dan and Keith in, and it helps to have the right people at the right time. Don't ever forget that. But what they really had was some time. Until then, and turn on now, local news, which has really seen itself shrunk. Now some guy gets 2.5 minutes. At most, you were getting 3.5. On a weekend, you might get 5 because there's college football going on. But what they had was an hour. So you had room for things to breathe and highlights to be out there. And so you had some space to go in there and add that flavor to it that I think just was previously lacking for sometimes no other reason than you just didn't have time. And then you had the right guys, and those two were guys that really shaped it. But if you go watch Keith Olbermann from when he was at, I think it was KTLA, but his time in Los Angeles, that's exactly how he was all the time. And part of that is, sometimes it's snark, they call it that. Sometimes if you just listen to Keith talk, like he's just smarter than other people, that's all it is. Like he's just a really smart, well-read dude. And that kind of came through. And then everybody who's followed, I think probably has modeled to some degree of that. But that's the beauty of this place is people were allowed to sort of be who they were. It wasn't just, hey, we need you to play sportscaster. Be the person you were. You want to take two people on the opposite ends, right? Compare Kenny Mayne and compare Stuart Scott, right? Like those guys are nothing alike. And yet they're very much alike in that if you met both those people right now, if they knocked on your door and you had dinner, you'd go like, that's exactly who that dude is on TV. Both Stuart and Kenny and all of us. And I think that's as Butchie says, once you can fake sincerity, man, you got it made. But if you can literally, be authentic, which is hard to do. Everybody here, most people I know on TV just are dying to be liked, right? We all want to. And then, and so we're trying to be the nicest version of ourselves. But it's okay that if you're funny to be funny, if you're Kenny and just being just completely dry and some people don't get them, then that's great. If you don't like the occasional Brewer joke, then probably people sometimes don't really go for me. But it has become that. There's certainly sort of a standard that though I would put it more towards those guys than me. I'm not quite an OG here. I'm old, but I'm not quite, in that line. But there were a lot of people that came through here that shaped the industry in a lot of ways. That's for sure.
It's interesting you brought up, Stuart Scott. And I think, one of the things that we loved so much about Stuart is because the way he played off of like your cadences and that dry kind of wink snark, but then Stuart like gave us some cathartic, right? He like gave us that punch. He gave us that energy. And I think that's one of the reasons SportsCenter was like just like this cultural identifier in its heyday, and it still is in its heyday. I'm not saying it's not anymore, but it was so interesting the way the tones played off of each other. And I bet that's so hard to find a partner that you can play off of so well when you're in those moments and you're live every single night. Chemistry must be the hardest thing to figure out.
Yeah, and listen, Stuart is as much a success because he sat next to Rich Eisen, and Rich Eisen because they sat next to Stuart, right? You can't split hairs. I get ultimately Stuart became iconic, and probably in that regard sort of outpaced Rich a little, but neither one of those guys is what they are without the other one. And they meshed because, you had this African-American guy, Chicago, North Carolina, and you had Rich, the Staten Island or Long Island, Manhattan, New York City guy. And so for whatever reason, that worked. I have people that I prefer to anchor with for whatever reason, because instead of like this, right, the pieces, they match. And that's great. But I think what's funny is I see myself as kind of the swing guy. If you work with Kenny Mayne, right, I just look like just normal, everyday, average dude. And if I work with Steve Levy, then I look like, well, he's the funnier guy, right? So I kind of just swing by who you're with. But the biggest part is as long as the other person is listening and paying attention, then I think you have some chemistry. It doesn't be forced. I was really lucky. The first person I got paired up with a bunch, and I say this a lot, and I'm only quoted in the big ESPN thick book. Those guys all have the fun a couple of times, but one of them is because of Linda Cohn, and I got paired with her first, and she was a made guy, right? She was full on. And I just came in, and she could have easily Bigfooted me, right? Like, who is this guy? He's been here 6 months, and I'm Linda Cohn. But she didn't. She embraced me, and she treated me as an equal, and she listens so that if you say something that person can engage, right? Sometimes you're stuck because somebody's trying to tell you in your ear that, that Corey Kluber just hit a no-hitter, and so you can't. But for the most part, she was completely engaged, and that helped. I kind of learned, because usually when you do sports, you're by yourself. 3.5 minutes on local news, it's just you, and then you turn and you say something, about Twiggy the water-seeing squirrel to the weather guy, and then that's the end. That's your only interaction, right? Because they always have that piece, right? Right after weather, before sports, it's something funny. It's always that, or it's it's some cow that's suckling a duck or whatever. There's always some crazy when you come through. So long as you and if you can fit where you are with that other person. And in my case, I'm lucky. I don't have the same experiences as some of these people, right? I love to work with Steve Levy. Here's a guy who's New York, who used to go to camp in the summer, because that's the only time, those 2 weeks when he went to sleepaway camp, that he saw grass, right? Which to me seems impossible. It's the only time he saw grass. And then you turn around and he works with me, and his running joke is every time something happens in, whether it's Wisconsin or Iowa or Ohio or Missouri or Illinois, he goes, "Hey, Anderson, aren't you from there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure enough." Because he just thinks it's all one big square state. Right after Philly, until you get to LA, maybe Vegas for Levy, it's all just one state. So he's like, "Anderson, are you from Wisconsin?" "I am." "Aren't you from Indiana?" "Yeah, I'm from Wisconsin." Same thing. So it helps to know who those other guys are too, and you work enough with them, it is. But yeah, I think that's part of the sauce that makes it worthwhile. And then the other appealing part is we show really good players making really good plays.
Yeah, Alex made the comment of SportsCenter in its heyday, and not to say, like he said, not to say it's not a flagship anymore, but I think I remember, I think when I was in college and probably even earlier, where that would just be on repeat all day. I would just be in my living room, I'd watch an hour, and then I'd get up and do things, and it would just go repeat again, and I'd stop, and I'd whether it was your team that would have a cool delivery, and I knew in 5 minutes it was coming back up, and I'd stop and I'd go watch it again. Right. Or there was a great highlight, and you knew it was going to be on again in 40 minutes. You could see it because you couldn't just go to YouTube and find it. And so I think when, Alex, I think when you said heyday, that's like what I think is just like it was on repeat all day. And so just, I'm curious to you now having been there 22 years and knowing kind of that landscape of what media was back then and linear and broadcast television, and now how many shows and how much content is out there and how many different channels you can access different stuff. How is that kind of changed and been on your end?
Yeah, it's harder in that, when I started, people didn't know the final score, right? So like, there you go. Yeah. Right? People didn't know. That was your hook. Hey, now they do. Chances are the second somebody does it, listen, our own people tweet it out, right? Which sort of undermines you. But I do think, and this is me stealing from John Witchegrass, I do think there's a reason we buy big, huge Best Buy color TVs, because that's the best way to see it and not just on your phone. So that helps, but you've got to change it. And more often than not, then you need to bring something that maybe you don't get. My own son, who is 19, right? He'll watch it and he'll go, "Oh yeah, Dad, I saw that on the internet." And whether it's on his phone but I'll go, "Colin, did you know that in this case, like the 6th no-hitter last night, did you know the last time the record is 8 in 1884? So I have to be able to now bring stuff that you don't know that has to be relevant, because you just don't want minutia, right? You don't want to know that Corey Kluber, or whatever, is the guy that, the third lightest right-handed pitcher to throw a no-hitter, because that doesn't do you any good. It still has to be relevant. But I think we still ultimately can deliver that makes it different, that makes it important. And I will say this about the heyday, Alex, because you don't have to apologize for that. I've always likened it like this. I liken it to the NASA space program. You had Bob Lee and you had Tom Mees and you had Boomer, and they were like Gemini astronauts, right? And Dan and Keith were the guys that landed on the moon. They were Buzz Aldrin, they were Neil Armstrong. And it was at the height, and people watched, and we were in a bunch of homes, and it was that whole thing. And then after that, we've had more of us come along. I would say, like, we're really good astronauts, but it's just not as sexy. It wasn't as sexy flying the space shuttle as it was landing on the moon. So I think you're exactly right. To some degree, heyday is probably proper in the way you do it. But I think that's where we were, right? Dan and Keith and some of those other guys, Ravi when he started, or Rich and Stu. I don't want to slight anybody that was in there, but Dan and Keith at 11 were kind of they were the guys. They landed on the moon, and they got all the fame, and appropriately so, because if it had just been two lackeys, it would not have taken off. So then we had a few other people that flew those Apollo missions. Great. And the rest of us have come along since then. And, I don't mind flying the space shuttle. That seems pretty cool. It dates me because we've now even retired the space shuttle. And I don't think I'll be long enough to go to Mars, but that's sort of the analogy I've always used. And I think it speaks to, Alex, what you're saying there and when it was, and it changes now too to Ryan, because I don't think it needs to be on again and again and again and again like it used to be. Because just like the morning newspaper is sort of outdated, it can become outdated between 6 a.m. and noon, where before it didn't. You could last till noon. Well, now, gosh, how much is going on in the morning? And you've got to, and they're competitors. Before we didn't have to worry about that. They were the only ones out there. But now something big happens. People are breaking. So it's a little different, and things are fragmented and all those other things. But I still think it's a pretty good watch, and it's a pretty good place to go get caught up on everything you need to know on the day.
Yeah. It's interesting just to hear you describe it, because I think one of the things that is missed, because the ESPN app I have, and last night I think it was LeBron hits crazy three against Golden State, and so it's so easy to click on it, see that play, and move on, right? But hearing some of the things that you just mentioned, I think what's missed, and something that I appreciate now being in sports media, and Alex and I having done broadcast, and you value information, is that we don't get the color of what that shot means, or how many times this kind of moment has happened, and we're so used to just seeing the highlight and a cool shot, and that's cool, but that context is sometimes missed. And so there was almost like an education that you got through a show like SportsCenter, and in getting the cool highlights, but also getting the context around it, and that made the moments even a little bit more special.
And listen, we do tons of research. People crave that. That's what our viewers want. And that's what I look for in other things. I'll just stump for my gal, Mizzou, Krista Schweitzer, right? When she set the 3,000 meter record. Okay, great. Now I have the time. But you know what I wanted? I wanted to see her splits. I wanted to see where she went through. I wanted to see kind of how she had paced herself. I didn't know, did she run the quick, she go out 1,500, run it really hard? Did she go, that's the kind of stuff that you want. And that's sort of, we are more now, have to do that more than ever, because you can't just go, home run and silly home run call and then go on to the next one. The viewers are a little more savvy. They demand a little bit more stuff. And we try to do that, but but our audience is like that. They crave stuff. As I think, I'm sure you guys see that, right? Track audiences are like that. They're not, we're not just saying that this, what was the Notre Dame kid ran 3:34.7 or whatever it was the other day to break the record of qualifying, right? But we want to know more, right? Because that's just like, okay, you gave me a time, but that doesn't tell me a whole story. I need the whole story. So hopefully we tell you the whole story, where your phone just gives you the headline.
I think you're muted, Al.
Yeah, he's doing a
Sorry
great
about
job
that.
of saying.
I'm giving you I'm giving you steal sign from third base. No,
Right.
It's interesting, the full media mix, right? We're talking about how in 2021, what is the bandwidth for ESPN's coverage as far as content, right? So it's like, yes, we yearn for that highlight, right? We want to see that LeBron dagger in the fourth quarter, right? But that is kind of, some people get that fix through insert Instagram channel here, House of Highlights, whatever. So, but I think there's three segments now, right? There's the actual highlight, there's the reaction, right? But then there's the story of the athlete, right? And that I feel like has been such a focus for ESPN as well especially the last few years, where we see the 30 for 30s, right? And always with Bob Lee and Outside the Lines. but we also have the reaction element, right? And it's almost like, how much time do we dedicate to reaction and analysis? Because now we have, first take, first jump, part of my take has been on for a long time now. But so I guess from your perspective, how has ESPN evolved its bandwidth per day to those 3 segments?
Right. Well, I think the first thing is, if you notice, we're trying to get into all those spaces. Like I said, LeBron's shot happened. We had just gotten off, and then we were waiting for LA. So there's about 5-8 minutes after we got done and that game ended. And so my guess is, after LeBron hit that shot, because then they have a post-game interview, and then it was a SportsCenter, is that thing was already on ESPN SportsCenter or some ESPN social media site. So we get it out. So we're trying to get into all those spaces. And one of the strengths that ESPN has had since I have been here is that we are not afraid of technology. And we figure, long as it's out there and it's got our name on it, we're fine with it. There were other networks that were very slow to want to cannibalize their audience. And so they didn't go all in on the network, or on the internet. And they didn't go all in on Twitter right away, because they think, well, if I show that, then they're not going to watch this. We were just like, listen, long as it says ESPN and you're watching it on some place, we can figure out how to monetize it. And if it does take away a little from a SportsCenter audience, it's okay, because we're building up an audience somewhere else and we're getting eyeballs and people see ESPN. So I think they've always been very good on that. In terms of SportsCenter, I think it's really important. I think it's this Jim Lair, who recently passed away, the great Jim Lair, who was with the McNear-Lair Report for many years on PBS. He used to always say, listen, there is room in every newscast, which is what we do, and just happen to be sports. But in any newscast, there is room for information, commentary, and analysis. The thing you need to do is make sure that it's labeled so people don't misconstrue what's happening. So when I'm on SportsCenter, most of the time, I am just giving you the information that's happening. If I bring on Tim Legler, you know that now you're getting analysis. Very rarely is there a personal commentary in there. But if you do, you got to make it. Whereas these other places, the personal commentary and getting that, well, then you can go to Pardon My Take or whatever we have now, Pardon the Interruption or First Take. So, but at least I know it's there. So if I go ahead and I get really mad because I don't like what Stephen A has to say, or Max, at least I know that's those guys' opinion, and that is not John Anderson or John Buccigross giving you sort of the record of what happened that night. So I think that's where those places fit. I think that's where, and on occasion we do that. We're going, oh, let's bring somebody in and have them talk on SportsCenter. And we kind of push back against that, because we're like, now it's getting confusing. And I think that was sort of, to some degree, that's where, when they tried to really reinvent the 6 o'clock with Michael and Jamel, which they should have. The 6 had been the same and I worked on it for 3 years. It had been sort of the same thing, but they didn't make any large changes. They'd say, oh, let's do this. Think outside the box, but make sure you have one foot in the box. So it never changed. So what they did is they're like, here, we'll throw our hat over the wall, and now we've made this huge change. Good for them. But I think what happened when people watched that was they weren't quite sure when, from Michael and Jamel, they were getting the news, when they were getting commentary, and it sort of got jumbled. And so now people were like, I don't know that I'm in for that. There were some other reasons, but I think that was one of the core things that made that show difficult for people, is like, what am I watching? Am I watching some First Take? Am I watching SportsCenter? Am I watching? And even if we just had more clearly defined that, I think that show would have been more successful. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but we're trying to get into all those spaces. I just think in all those things you talk about, we just have to be really careful to let people know what it is you are doing and what you're watching, because it's very easy to float between the 3 or 4 of them and not know.
Well, I would rather have them labeled, right? And I don't want to get too abstract about media platforms and journalism, but we've seen, like, you can look at insert news platform here outside of sports that maybe blurs those lines too much. Right. And I think being able to segment out, like the way you said, keeps sports kind of out of that gray area where we're trying to be fed information. But, as a consumer, there's times where I don't know where we cross the line to commentary analysis. Is this, is this becoming subjective? Right. And towing that line is so difficult. And And I think actually segmenting shows out and literally labeling them in the appropriate format might be the way I almost wish more news platforms embrace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I said, we're lucky in SportsCenter where it's pretty, even if it doesn't, have a font that says it, it's pretty obvious. Here's Tim Legler, and here's Tim to break down the game. All right, well then we're pretty clear on that. When you see Michael Wilbon in, and so now here we're bringing Michael Wilbon for more perspective because who knows more about Chicago than Chicago's own. So now if he wants to tell me why the Cubs win is so significant to such generations of people, at least I know what that is, and likewise in the morning, which isn't, the whole arguing thing is not sort of my cup of tea, the made up arguments. And they always go, well, we're just trying to give you the great bar room or debate. I'm like, okay, great. I'll just have it with my buddies in the actual bar. But I get it. People like to watch. They like to get sort of incensed at somebody. It helps them. They like when somebody nationally is either on their side or becomes their foil. That, all that's good. But at least when I turn that on, I know pretty much that's what it is, right? You may go here is the sixth no-hitter of the year. Okay, fact. But now it's just, is that good for baseball? Well, now I know you guys are taking sides and ranting, and I'm not, I don't have to, I can take that for what it's worth, but I don't have to take that as gospel on either side. Likewise, when they always go, well, how do you not root for your teams? Well, mostly you stay out of it. But even if I told everybody, because I think they know I'm from Wisconsin, I really like the Brewers when they win and it's okay for the Packers. In the end, I could not change the final score of the NFC Championship game, right? I really wanted the Packers to win. I don't think it was terribly obvious, but in the end, the Buccaneers and Tom Brady had more points, and I can't change the final score. And so, who cares? You could get mad at me if I just, was everything like, wow, that was what a blown assignment by the Packers at the pass before halftime, which it was. But even if I did that completely slanted and everybody in Tampa goes, God, he hates us, blah, blah, blah. You know what? At the end, you still won the game. So be happy and go to the Super Bowl and win again.
John, I want to give some of our core audience what they want, and that's some track and field talk. So I'm gonna transition us a little bit because I could talk about this all day. And we'll probably come back to some of this because this is it's just obviously cool just because what you and your team and what folks at ESPN does. It has shaped a lot of how we consume sports, and it obviously shapes even at Flow Sports how we've approached things, right? And so it's had such a play in everyone's world. But you have had I don't know if other people outside of track and field would view it as fortunate, but I'm gonna say fortunate opportunity to get more involved in track and field while being at a network. During a time and during years where like major networks aren't focused on track and field 24/7 like they are with other sports. So you've had the opportunity to kind of carve part of your role or personality or however you want to say it at ESPN as kind of a lead now in that space, which has been cool for us and having this relationship with you and seeing it grow. And I'm just curious how that came about. I like to say it was because we worked on the Bowerman together, but I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate. So, but how did that come about, and how did that become more part of what you do now?
So I kind of got my toe in the door literally through the Bowerman, and I lucked out there because Missouri's old head track and field coach, a man by the name of Rick McGuire, who coached the women's team starting in 1983, which is when I arrived at Mizzou. And I ran for a wonderful old coach by the name of Bob Thiel, who will be 98 this fall. He couldn't have been, he was a great coach. And then after he retired, Coach McGuire took over both programs for 25, 27 years, whatever it was. So I was always close with Rick. And he was big in the Coaches Association, which obviously gives away the Bowerman. And he said one day, he goes, I think you might be the right guy host the Bowermans. He said, I'm going to talk to the people there. There aren't many people. And he obviously knew my background. Most people, I think, if they'd watched, had no idea that I ran track. If you watch me walk through the cafeteria right now, you'd go, for sure that guy didn't run track. If you go looking for the record books, you'd go like, I'm not sure that guy even, has ever run a step, even an 11-step approach. But anyway, so Coach McGuire thought I'd be good for that. And so Sam Seams, sight unseen, gives me the job, right? Luckily, the first year they had it, the gal from Houston did not distinguish herself enough that they didn't think they could upgrade it. And lo and behold, I get the job. And you guys know this. There's not a more underserved, not just fan base, an underserved clientele than track and field coaches who want to show that they have these great athletes. And they do, right? Like, we go crazy over the draft because we're going to see those NFL guys on Sunday in 6 months, right? Listen, we're going to see Javon Harrison in 6 weeks or whatever it is, 8 weeks in Tokyo. So there's no waiting. Like, the things you see in college are like great right here, right now. But so you get in there, and if you acknowledge these, here's the coaches group that are sitting there. If you acknowledge them, that they're like, that you know a little bit about your sport, and then that you care about it, that you understand it. Like Ryan, remember, I know you made the joke about when Breanne Tyson and Ashton Eaton were getting married, right? And I said, does it on the invitation, does it say it's going to take 2 days, right? Just the fact that you knew the decathlon, which took 2 days, right? They eat it up. So, and then I made the comment that you guys probably will never see me in the record books, but I ran for Bob Thiel. And the number of people that came up to me afterwards that had nothing to say about my performance, but just said, well, oh my God, I know Bob. Bob was great. How do you know him? What a wonderful gentleman. Like, it gave me entree into this whole world. So suddenly now I have a foothold because of this. Coach McGuire gets me in the Bowerman, and I ran for Coach Thiel. And so many of these coaches knew and respect and are friends of Coach Thiel. So now I'm embraced. Come here to ESPN, and this was the big break. Contract negotiations, as we know this, here's what we can pay you. Can we pay you anymore? No, we can't pay you anymore. This is as much as we can pay you. But we kind of like you. Is there anything else that you might like to do that you haven't done? Right? So most people would go, yes, I'd like to go to the Masters. And I said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go to Hayward Field and cover the track championships. And they're like, well, that seems like that shouldn't be hard to do, right? We could probably come up with that. Turns out that's the really hard thing to do, because for the longest time, right, it's right where the NBA Finals is. And so, sorry, you got to go see LeBron. Well, what am I going to tell my bosses? Sorry, I can't really go do Steph Curry and LeBron. I really need to go. So I'm not so dumb as to throw that away. But in the contract, getting more money, and what they say was, how about we put 5 track and field meets in your deal? I'm perfect. Let's do that. So then we're New York Marathon, right? And as soon as we got that contract, I went in and I said, my guess is the line isn't very long for people that want to do the marathon. I'll do anything. I'll run the motor camera and drive it. I really did. I love it. I want to be a part of it. And then how about we do the SEC indoor and outdoor and the 2 NCAA meets? There's my 5. And so that's sort of how I got my foot in the door. In fact, when I showed up one time, Dwight and Jill are like, how did you end up here? They had their little kingdom, right? And they were like, where did this guy come from? It is. You kind of got Bigfooted, right? And I do think, and I try to say this with the most humility possible, I do think coaches like the fact that here's somebody that is on SportsCenter that is recognizable, that is at the event and likes the event and adds some legitimacy to the event. Here's a guy that's now fronting the event that most people see 200 nights a year and has been there, had been there 17, 18 years, had sort of a presence that you don't get if we just took somebody who, he's wonderful as the voice of Oregon and what he does. But if you'd put Paul Swangard out front, I'm not sure people know him as well as they do the SportsCenter guy. And so I think that helped to again, further impact that. And when I went out there, then the SEC people were like, we like having him here. That elevates it's like when Reese Davis shows up on game day. We like having that. So all that kind of worked together. But I think in all of it, Ryan, actually, what's at the core of it is they go, that guy really likes track and field. And not only passionate about it, and depending on which sites you read, because you'll read this everywhere, I think I know a lot about it. Now, people will tell you that, no matter what it is, you're an idiot, that you don't know anything, Oh, look, that guy ran 3:20. No, he didn't. He ran 3:20.82. Got it. Sometimes we can round. It's okay. It's not, it's not a problem. So that's sort of how I sort of went from getting my foot in the door to kind of getting in the door. And now I feel like I'm sort of in the room. And I'm, sort of certainly around here kind of prominent. And so when the ATL starts, people are like, what's going on with the American Track League? And I have to explain how that's not really us. But Paul Doyle calls, who's trying to run these things. And he said, can we get you involved? And I told him the other day, really frankly, I said, the best thing I can do for you right now is I can still be here on SportsCenter, and I can get your great performances on TV. That's the one thing when I'm out there, I can try to call in and go, listen, Javon Harrison just took 7 jumps and was clean in the high jump from 7.1 to 7.8 3/4. You and I, all the 3 of us here in this box, know that that's amazing. I'm not sure it's totally amazing to people here that they're not like, especially if I said he jumped 236 and they'd be like, "Hank, I think we have the wrong number," and they hang up on me. But when I'm here and I see that, then I can put it on. We had one weekend where we had a ton of performances, and I had a producer, and because I've been here 20 years, I can kind of throw a little weight around. I said, just give me a minute and a half and let's show these 4 or 5 really good performances. People went cuckoo, They were like, wow, track was on SportsCenter. And so sometimes I can do more good being here, trying to get those things on. During the Texas relays, when Tara Davis jumped 7 meters, I got a text from both Joe Montgomery and Dwight. They said, here it is, boom. And I said, all right, we'll get it on. And even if it's in the top plays, at least it's somewhere and it gets some spot, And I sometimes I think I can do more good being right here sitting in Bristol to help get those things on. I can being out there. And I look for those. I watch for those, right? Hey, let's put Mondo on. He's really good. And let's Grant Holloway just continues to destroy people and set the world records. Let's put the sticks on. And, and so through all those little things, now I guess I have some small place of a little influence in the sport, which is great.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, you like track and field and a little bit about it, but I know you as a new guy to the broadcast scene. I remember when you first got to the Bowerman, and when you first were getting on TV to do the broadcast. It wasn't. It wasn't just you were a new guy and you liked track and field. You had the notch that you competed, but we also know that it takes a lot of work to know the stats. And what was very apparent with you is that you put the effort in to know your shit, to excuse my language. And I say that because you could have been a SportsCenter guy that's like, I'm a SportsCenter guy. I know sports. I ran track. I'm going to show up and I'll be able to get through it. It was very, I think I noticed it the most, John, honestly, when you did the New York City Marathon. And I was like, he made a real effort to know what he's talking about and be an expert at what he's doing right now.
Well,
and I appreciate that.
Oh, but I'll tell you, here's the thing, right? Because you can't fool us. We're a little like NASCAR fans. If you try to do that, like NASCAR is not for me. As racing goes, I prefer people going in circles as opposed to cars. But because of that, and I don't know, and I don't grab to it, I have to study harder on that because that audience knows if you're trying to skate by. And track and field's the same way. They know if you're trying to skate by and do exactly what you said. So I'm lucky because I enjoy that. I like watching dudes run 9.8 or, when Bolt came through and I'm like, I need to be in that commercial. Or I like watching guys jump 7, 8 3/4. And it's staggering. So at least it's not work, but you owe that to people to not just go, well, look, there's the guy in front and he appears to be leading. Because that cheats, right? That cheats everybody when they do that. And some of that's hard. The problem with track is, right, you look all that stuff up and you get prepared and you're ready for this guy to have a great day and he disappears, right? And you're like, I've just spent an hour, looking where he was. When's his last race? What 10K what half did he run like in the marathon, 6 weeks out that he's trying. And all of a sudden that guy's gone because he drank somebody's water bottle and he's gone to the 13-mile mark and you're like, whip, off it goes. But you have to do it. And I like it. And it's funny. You say I compete, and I did. I would have been a terrific kind of NAI D3 runner or jumper, but I didn't want to. Like J school at Mizzou was more important to me, and I was fortunate enough that Coach Teal let me run. If you ever got to meet Bob Teal, if any of you guys, Ryan, you have some bona fides. Alex, you have some bona fides. You guys are probably not the right people, but if I don't know, if you have an intern in the place who you just found, Coach Teal would have said, sure, come and run, right? Because track's cheap that way. It's not like a walk-on in football. football, right? Here's a pair of shoes and there's the golf course. And in about 6 weeks, if I have to, I can run you off, right? You'll know if that person's there. So I competed. I didn't compete especially well. I won twice in college. One of the meets, I was the only dude. Okay. So imagine if I had no height or something, how awful that would have been, right? Like, it's not an Olympic performance, but it's clutch. The other day, so Javon Harrison jumped 7, 8 3/4, and we get done with the broadcast. We're done, and we're still, Dwight and I, because we're just complete, despite talent level, groupies for the event, right? And it was amazing to watch. I mean, he just kept answering, right? Sullivan would make it, and he'd just come back. It was phenomenal. And Dwight kind of says with this wry smile, completely joking, he goes, "Holy crap. I just realized I got pushed down, the U.S. all-time list again." And I looked at him and I'm like, "So did I." I said, people in the 4,000th, we got feelings too. I get it that you went from whatever it was, 7 to 8 or whatever. But, if you're 4,012, I don't have as many positions to give up as you do, right? You got a long way to go. So, but I do think it has competed, and I say this to people all the time. We were on Name Drop before the NCAA track cross-country meet. We were on with Diljit Taylor, and she was talking about her rise from where she was at D2 at the California school that I can't pronounce, and now she's at BYU killing people. But it doesn't matter what level you run at. Okay, if you're like Ron, if you're a half miler, and you are an NAIA or D3 or D1, the only thing that changes is the time it takes to be competitive in that and win. So at D1, you might have to run 147. And I don't care, in NAIA or something, you got to run 159, whatever it is. To get to whatever that potential you have is, you got to do the exact same things, right? People do pretty much the same workouts. They just don't quite have the same, instead of hitting your repeat 400s at whatever, 65, you do them at 68. But at any level of that, it takes about the same effort to reach whatever that potential is you have, which I think is A, the beauty of the sport, and B, even if my PR is not 7, 8.5, and it's just, this is where the thing is, whenever people ask me how high I jump, that's where it's key. I always give it in metric. Then that way they're like, okay, listen, if you're going to jump 214 or you're going to jump 236, you still work your ass off just as much when it goes through. Right. And so, yes, I competed, and it wasn't always great, but I do think there's something to having been in the arena that is helpful. Even if it's not Olympic Games pressure, believe me, if you're in the Green Bay City meet or the Brown County meet, that's pressure. It's pressure for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
John, I'd like to kind of tie our two segments, our categories together a little bit. You reference SECs a little bit, and I think, Ryan and I are always, the question is like, how do we make track and field more approachable? How do we bring it to the masses? How do we, put it on a production level where more people can appreciate the insane talent of these athletes these athletes and these coaches that we care about, right? So from your perspective, like, if we're talking about, best practices for a broadcast production on ESPN,
right,
what would those be? Because I think of SECs, I almost think as like the most tangible olive branch to somebody who might not watch track and field, but they are a college football fan, right? If you turn into SECs and you can see a team score, right, you can understand that, right? And if you see a horizontal jump, like, well, they got over that bar and that one didn't, So I guess coming with, how do we approach a system where we open the aperture and production levels to more tangibly showcase the talent of these athletes to a wider audience? Like, what are best practices in your your experience to a successful production?
So we have done some of that. The first thing you need to do is show the best athletes as often as you can. I argued with our people a great deal at the SEC outdoor meet 2 years in Fayetteville. And we just kind of teased whatever was next. Here's the women's 200. Here's the men's We have a men's shot put, whatever it was, but it was just sort of generically whatever was, actually I shouldn't say shot put, was what was ever the next race that was on the track, right? And some of those were better than others. And I said, why are we not showing Grant Holloway every chance we get? Why are we not bumping Mondo Duplantis is going to vault when we return? And they're like, well, he might not vault right when we get return. Who cares? Show me your stars a lot. How often do we tease, hey, and coming up, LeBron James? Or we always try to tease Michael Jordan in some way because we know people grab their attention. So first off, let us promote our best people, right? We didn't do a great job of that at the SECs this past weekend. Why aren't you telling me when a thing Mo is running, right? And tell me again and again and again. I don't care. Put a freaking countdown clock on there, right? A thing Mo coming in 13 minutes. So let's do that first. Let's sell our stars and get them on TV as often as we can, right? We should see every Javon Harrison jump. We were lucky we came on early this time because of when some of the multi-events were on. And even though it was on the web, we got to see them all. But we should never miss that guy, right? We'll show every 200 meter at the SEC indoor, every 200 meter heat, every section, even if there's like 7 of them and somebody doesn't qualify. Well, you know what? How about we show the guy live that's going to high jump 7 3/4. And if anybody qualifies at the 200, then we'll run that back on tape instead of the other way around. I think the other thing we could do now is to enforce how good these guys are, Alex, is let's put what the Olympic standard is. Dwight Stone said afterwards, when Javon had jumped 7 3/4, he said, you realize 7 3/4 has only failed to medal in the Olympics twice? Okay, we shouldn't be saving that for us walking out the door. That needs to be, wow, he just made that. Do you realize 7 3/4 has medaled in every Olympics? I get there's some modern standard, like I get it, 1900 probably could have guessed, in Athens that made it. But let's make sure we do that. Let's put up sometimes if we've got records, because we always put it, here's the record, here's the college record, here's the facility. Let's put up what the Olympic standard is. Let's put up what the trials A standard is to show people what these things are. We can inform along the way. And I get sometimes people are always like, well, but now we're dumbing it down for, everybody else. And the track and field people get a little snooty. Like, oh, I can't believe they just said this basic stuff. Well, you know what? I turn on the NFL every Sunday. You know what I see? I see the little yellow first down marker. I know what the hell a first down is, right? I know where the little guy holding it means, but we put it on there because we tell you people about that. And you know what we also tell them is you got 3 timeouts and here's a 2-minute warning. Everybody knows that, but it's okay. But track people get kind of mad when we do that. They're like, I can't believe they're talking down to us. No, we're just telling you what's happening, and it's okay by way of review. But in trying to put it together, let's sell our stars, right? Let's put it up. Let's font whatever. Let's identify that better so that people know what's happening here. Whether it's Javon Harrison doing that, here's the trial standard, here's the Olympics. I don't care. And some of that's hard. There are so many records. Some of that takes preparation. Who's running in this meet? Who's going to, who's going to be great? Who's going to be Noah Williams? Okay, let's have it. He leads the freaking world in the 400, right? I don't know. That's everybody, right? Like, how many people are faster than him in the 400? As Tim Kirchner would say, 0. It's him. But I don't think we can sell that enough, right? If we treated Javon Harrison or Noah Williams or Terrence Laird, or, because I don't want to be SEC-centric, Cole Hocker, if we treated those dudes, Turner Washington ASU, like we treat Zion Williamson, then we have something. And you can't tell me it's not sexy enough, because every time I tell people, name me the last person you talked about track and field that didn't tell you what they ran in high school. Everybody did, right? Football, baseball, any of them. They all did. Everybody ran in high school. Everybody was a part of that. Even the jocks who were the football players, they ran in the spring. So I think the audience is there, and I think we just need to do a better job of it. Let's pick them out. And even if the people go, well, shot putters and discus throwers and javelin people are people too, and they deserve coverage, and they do. And if I got a superstar guy, then Gleb Dudarev at Kansas who throws the hammer, then we'll get him out there and we'll show him. The other thing is, I would think it's hard to make meets go 4 days.
Mm.
The NCAA is just, it's 21 events, and it's, men's, women, and that's great, because I think we should, some coaches don't like it because they want to have the whole team and they want everybody there. But I think it's okay. I think it's nice the way it features everybody and you don't get lost. The other part, and I'm going to say this and then drop my voice, is you were talking about the team score, is we've got to do a better job of letting. Arkansas won the SEC indoor meet, and you never once saw an Arkansas guy cross the finish line for 17 events. They didn't win any of them. So people are watching at home and go, well, how the hell did Arkansas win? I didn't see him, and Alabama did that sort of the same thing when they won the indoor 3 years ago down, and it was 2018 down in College Station. They had one guy, Shelby McEwen, won the high jump, which, people didn't see. So we got to figure out how to do that better to show how this team race is coming. And I don't know if that's after we show a certain event, go, boom, here's how it went. Or maybe instead of just having the score there just as is, let's have it moved. Here's where it was. Okay, now let's literally add in the 27 points Arkansas had in the 5K. And literally, we can do that. Let's see it move. And now people go, wow, there's the impact that made. Or we've tried to do this some, and it's hard, but show me how many guys, when we get into those last 3 or 4 meets, how many guys does LSU left have in here, left to compete, right? We knew in the end of that meet the other day when they went to the 5,000, all LSU had left was the 4x4. And Arkansas had 6 guys running the 5 and a 4x4 team. I don't know if it's a parentheses or what. Let's tell people so you can kind of keep track. All right, they got, there's 4 events left and they got 12 dudes, and there's 4 events left and these guys have 3. All those things I think could be done to help improve the product. I think we're working at that as we get in there. And I think all that would make it better for viewers. I think people that know it well would still enjoy knowing those kind of things. So there's a lot of ways, we just don't do it as often, right? We broadcast 60 basketball games a week and 13 or 14 football games in a Friday and a Saturday, but we do 1 track meet every umpteen weeks or months. And so that becomes part of the difficulty.
John, I think one thing I think the challenge that Ryan and I always have, and we talk about the balance of like getting exposure, and like you said, all the things that we want, all those things, right? We want the graphics, right. We want the high jump line, we want the long jump pit line, right? Like we want that really sexy like graphics package before each race. There's all these things that we know would elevate the production experience, right? But I think one of the challenges in our sport, as we get to this place where we're like, I wish we had this, I wish we had this, I wish we had this. It's 4 days long, and like the things start to pile up, right? And at some point, it's like, is this worth a broadcast, right? So it's like we run this balance of like, I really want this production piece to be beautiful, and we need the resources to make it beautiful and worthy of this major audience. And like, hey, let's just throw it up because, well, something's better than nothing. And that's, I feel like, the constant push and pull we are in track and field.
I think you're with all of it. What's important? What are we just documenting strictly the event or the events, or are we helping to bring people the whole atmosphere? I think that's sometimes what misses in a broadcast that I'd like to see. Let's see some atmosphere. How many times you see a football game, and we see Aaron Rodgers out early and he's just throwing in his shorts, but we put it on and we talk about it because we know we're going to see him. So why not show Grant Holloway in the tunnel going over a couple of hurdles? Why not, bring some of that? Why not, in our case, why not just shut the hell up when a runner comes around the Bowerman corner at Hayward Field and people start to go crazy, right? Like, I think there are a lot of ways that you could improve some of that. People just have to be willing to do it, to have to be able to do things they haven't done before. And listen, and if it doesn't work, that's okay too. But if what we have is the same and kind of stale, or we're looking to improve it, then try something else, you know? And you know how it is, we're announcers, like the worst thing we think is, what if we have dead air? You know, yikes. There'll be people there this year so that you'll hear them, you know, let them go. We did that when the end of the end of the 400 with Noah Williams and Bryce Deadman. And he came around that corner, and finally at Cushing Stadium, they had 2,200 people in the stands. Let's just be quiet. Let's just lay it out and take it, you know? And some of that's not just on the announcer. Some of the producers just got to go, okay, shh, we'll do that, you know? So I think there are a lot of ways to do it, make it improve, but it's hard. It is hard. As here in my office, I have the PGA Championship up right now, right? That's a hard thing to cover because it's 4 days long and the course is almost 8,000 yards. It's a big playing field with a lot of things, but at least it builds to a climax, right? It sort of, there's inherent drama in that. Track doesn't, but it's a really hard thing because you're looking at, like I said the other day, outdoor, you get 21 events and 14 schools. That's a lot to keep track of what's going on at the SEC meet, or you go to the Pac-12, 21 events and 12 teams. And it's hard to keep track of all that information, you know? So I think it's a case of some of that is doing what works, what we know, how do we expand that? And some of it is just how do you refine that? But that is sort of a chore. There's no question about that. I don't have any perfect answers in it. When it comes through, it's amazing the things that you get from people who are not normal track viewers. I was sitting there during the 10,000 the other night when Kiprop was winning, and my 17-year-old daughter said, "Dad, this would be easier to keep track of if you put how many laps were left on the screen." You're like, wow, out of the mouths of babes.
Can't argue with that.
Oh, you mean what we do when we're in the stadium? Yeah.
Right. But it's right. But it's never on screen. We got the rolling.
Yeah.
The clock down there. Just put 12, 11, 10. Right. We can do that.
Yeah.
My God, we can put a first down line on. We can do that. But I don't. You know, I just take it for granted. I'm sitting in there and I look down and there's cross start finish line. There's the lap count. I don't think anything of it. And, you know, here's my 7-year-old daughter who's just, you know, who runs track, by the way, and hates running every single step. But she feels like she's going to disappoint me and my dad if she doesn't try to high jump. But anyway, but you're like, wow, that's a really genius idea. And I wish I had a really good answer. Instead, you just made me feel really stupid as to why we don't do stuff. You know, right? But we do that. We don't show it. We don't show it in the steeplechase, and we don't show it in the 3 or the 5. And we should, because that's, you know, that makes sense. You know, so there are little things too, right? Like, how about we just make this? Let's not miss 3-foot putts. It's great to see if we can find a way to, you know, make a 60-foot putt for eagle, but let's not miss a 3-foot one for par, like on that.
Yeah. You mentioned bringing more attention to the stars, right? And I think I'm sure you've heard this. There's that balance of bringing attention to the stars, but not forgetting everybody else. And they, you know, we deal with that, and because again, there's stars drive interest, and they in some cases they drive viewership, and then there's also the element of a great race, and so a star has to have a competitor, right? So if it's just about the star, you lose the competitor. All this, right? So I say all this because I'm curious your thoughts on, when I look back, I think the first Olympics I really remember being excited about and a real fan of, and knowing who was there, was in '92 with Barcelona. And I remember it, you know, that Carl Lewis was huge at the time and all these people. And so you had these major stars, but I remember even in like the 100 meters, I knew the whole field. It was like, it was like the starting lineup of a basketball team when you're a kid and you know them all, or baseball team. Mm-hmm. It was like, I knew who everyone was on the start line of the 100 meters, you know, and there was the Frankie Fredericks and the Michael Marshes and all these people that you kind of knew, the Carl Lewises and the Donovan Baileys of the world, and all these people, the big names, but 6, 7, 8 deep, they were all relevant. And it feels like now it's not that deep. And do you get that sense in terms of the depth, when I say depth, the knowledge that people have of the depth of the fields, and why you have any thoughts on why it was able to be that way back then, and maybe now it's not?
First, I think there's always a tendency to romanticize the past. You know, in that it was always that way. By the way, I can remember '76 was my first significant. That's when I thought, wow, that's the greatest thing ever. Which is why when we do the Bowermans, I see Herman Frazier and try to act like he's just a normal dude, but he's not, because he won the 4x4 gold and it's got a bronze medal from the Open. But first off, I think the reason it's that there's less, Ryan, ID there is because we shrink it. We just don't see it as much as we used to. It used to carry there. It used to be more often. It used to be more prominent in and around, whether it was ABC Wide World of Sports, or when they had the Russian USA meets in the late '70s or mid to late '70s. Like, those drew attention, and so we don't have that quite as much. So that's part of it. The other thing is, I think we got to start getting guys racing each other more often, right? How come I can't get Lyles? And I realize there's a suspension here, but why can't I get Lyles and Christian Coleman in a lane more often, right? Why can't I was so close and then he scratched out? And I love him and I consider him a friend. That when Brazier scratched out the other night, we didn't get to see him, right? Like, I need to see Brazier and Hoppel race a lot. The other part is it's a big playing field in terms of globally, right? When you talk about those guys, it's if we can identify just 4 or 5 Americans, that's great. But then how about, internationally, you got to figure out who else is in that field. And that's hard to, get all those guys together when those meets then are in Europe, which is where we can kind of learn about those guys. Another Missouri guy, Christian Coleman, Christian Cantwell, the thrower, he texts me one day and he's like, I can't believe I'm here working out on my treadmill and I got to watch your sorry ass at SportsCenter at, whatever. And I'm like, hey, said, at least you get to see my sorry ass at 10 a.m. I got to stay up till 3 a.m. to see you throw a freaking rock in Switzerland. So get off my ass, about who's watching who, right? But there's some truth to that. It's hard to get a hold of that. It's hard to see it. It's not as prominent as it used to be. We've got one meet essentially here, maybe 2, that happens. The season coincides, and sometimes in a bad spot. It's like, look at the NCAA, right? Here's the NCAA. Here are these people, Alex, that you should know, right? That we're going to see it in just a couple weeks after that in the trials. And, oh, by the way, we'd like to find a place, but we're showing the NBA Finals. And we're trying to drive all our viewers there because that's where we're making our big sales number. We're not making it on ESPN2 in the track. So that becomes a difficult situation again. And in fact, like, we're really excited because I think because of the way the playoffs are this year, they're not going to interfere. And I think we're going to be on the big channel. I think we're on E1 for a couple of the sessions, which helps. But so, Ryan, I think those are a couple things. It's hard to get everybody. The number of meets that we see stateside has shrunk. And then when we see those things, we need to see those guys in the marquee events go up against each other. Because I'm with you. I love the great race. I want to sell the stars to get people into the tent. But the SEC, as great as it is, it's not a great distance conference. We've got some some one-offs. But even if you're running in your 10,000 and you're going to run 29:30, which isn't just blistering the world. That was a great race with Kiprop and what he went to. And in the 5,000, when he's getting DQ'd because he and old Luke Mead decide to hand fight and putting elbows into each other, right? Like, that was a great, exciting race. And when you get into the race, you find that you don't care about the time. At the end of it, if somebody's way out in front, now we're watching it. But if not, suddenly that time, even though it's down the lower right hand, we're not even watching that, right? We're watching the surges. We're watching that. So I'm with you. We got to, when you have the potential for great matchups, even if it is not necessarily by time, if you have that great foil, we don't always have to have, Carl Lewis and Mike Powell trying to out jump each other at the World Championships and get the world records. So I don't want to minimize that when you say let's sell the stars. I'm talking about get them in the tent, and then let's sell them all the rest of the good stuff once I got them. I want to make you listen. On my way to seeing Mondo do that. If I can show you a great half mile, even if it's at 1:48, that's okay.
Yeah.
If I got two guys leaning at the tape, two women leaning at the tape, let's see it as well.
I just want to reinforce this real quick for people listening to this, because I think, one of the phrases when you're in the track and field community that you hear a lot is how, save the sport or grow the sport or make the sport better. And there's so many different things that people think. And I feel like you said it earlier, let's not miss the 3-foot putt. How do we get guys and girls to race each other that people like to watch race, right? And, from the media perspective, taking that a step further, we all the work we've done with different events and meet directors and have had a number of meet directors that share this frustration because they even see the value in promoting their event. The sport isn't even set up in a way where people are committing to run a race until the day before, so you can't even talk about it. And that's the beauty of a conference championship. Who's going to be there. The SEC, the schools that are going to be there, and the kids are going to be there because they're trying to win a conference meet. So you can be confident to talk about that. But a lot of these competitions, not only do you have people not racing each other, you don't even know who's going to show up sometimes 100% confirmed until the day before. And that's really hard.
Right. The sport hurts itself in that regard. It'd be nice if it was set up better. It would be nice if they were incentivized to some degree in how that you could sort of force people into wanting to do that. I get training things too. I get it, where the other day Shamir Little ran an open 800 because she was trying to build strength. And, so I understand that there are things, especially in Olympic year, where there's a bigger picture. And the idea is I'm looking out for myself and what is my best training method, so that in this case, when I'm at the trials and then a few weeks later when I'm in Tokyo, that I'm lined up and I'm the best person I can be. And so that may not always be, I got to run a 400 this week against somebody else of that. But I think you could find a way to incentivize that, especially as you said. I think most agents are on board with that. I think there are, I think it's just making them see the value in that. Even if you take the L, that's okay. How many times is a guy lose in a boxing match and we're like, when are we fighting again? Right? Especially in that sport, because it's tenths of a second. And okay, so you dropped one, let's go back again. Or figure out a way that maybe here's Lyles and Coleman in the 100, and then let's run them in the 200 if you want to make it more your speed, But somewhere along the line, the people in charge of the sport need to figure out how to better do that. How do I give these people more opportunities? How do I make it a race I want to be in with that guy? And we're lucky. There's only a very few around here where we get people, like people want to run a pre, so we're going to get stuff there. But you get into Europe and okay, well, who's got this? Promoter's got how much money to spend, and maybe he just can't do it. I get all the reasons it can happen. I'm trying to think of, I'm with you, Ryan. How do we make it more so that it does happen? And again, most often that's freaking money, and can you pay? Because if you could make it worthwhile, if the money was there, then those guys would line up next to each other all the time. Right? If you could say, hey, here it is, but I don't know that everybody goes, here's, 50,000 and 50,000, right? And do you treat everybody equally? And then now it's like a boxing match, right? Now, like, well, wait, if this guy's getting $10, I'm not coming for $8. How about you come for $8, race, win, then next time we'll repeat it. Guess what? You'll get 10 and he'll get 8. It is a question that I wish I had a better answer. That's the thing with a lot of track. I wish I had better answers for. The thing is, I'm with you. The sport, I don't think, is dying. I think the sport's really good, and there are a lot of really good people. How do we capitalize on the momentum and whatever happens coming out of the Olympics? I think that always becomes troublesome. All of a sudden, it just goes away. Here's the star, right? And it's crazy because they're the biggest stars of the Olympics. There's a reason it's in the second half and it takes 10 days because they want to highlight all these people because people will watch it, right? Swimming and track are the great mysteries. We would watch Michael Phelps like crazy. Michael Phelps swimming outside of the Olympics in Omaha at some nationals, people don't care. Show me bull riding. It's the same thing. But it's remarkable. So how do we capitalize on that, right? Fred Curley just ran he just ran a sub 10 the other day and beat Justin Gatlin. Are you shitting me? Okay, so once Fred runs, how are we going to get that? How do we keep pressing? People should pay attention to Fred. And oh, by the way, I'm going to pay attention to him because he's going to be with Michael Norman. And, but I don't know how we drive that together soon enough,
Mm-hmm.
And they're fragile. And you know how these guys are, right? In all of them, we all have some fragile psyches. And I don't know, do I want to risk getting beat by that guy pre-Olympics, pre-trials before I have to go back in there against him again? So there are a lot of things that work against him. It's unique in that regard because headspace becomes such a big deal. But yeah, everything you say is right. We got to get these people together more often, and I don't know the best way to push them together.
So interesting you mentioned boxing, because I had on my notes here, I was going to bring up MMA, right? And like how well they do with promoting each other. And, like that, there is a cadence of eventually, right? There's that heightened, like a delivery, right? You're building this momentum to this match. And if somebody loses, well, they're going to have a rematch. And we're constantly this constant evolution of stories, right? So there's MMA. And then I want to, just recently, it feels like there is more of a interest in, because of the Preakness and Belmont Stakes has come out and all that, horse racing. And I'm not trying to demean track and field athletes or put them on this like same level as horses, obviously, but there is this there's this gravity that pulls people towards sports, and right. I'm using MMA and horse racing in this perspective, but I don't think that we can't pull on that gravity. That gravity isn't there for track and field. I think the drama is there, and that the spirit of sport and racing and fighting and is there. So it's like, why are we so different? Is it the story? Is it the narrative that we're not telling, or is it betting? Is it sports betting? Like, what are the things that don't make this as tangible to the typical American sports audience?
First off, great. I thought you were going to go with the topical corticosteroid, and I thought, well, let's leave that behind with the horse. When you rub in.
Yeah.
Both, okay, especially in MAA, which I think is a better example. That's really centralized, man. Dana White runs that thing, right? So He's got it. There's a central power with that. And then, so he takes care of his own. I'm going to make this fight. Now he pitches him, follow me here. So he takes care of his own, and there are rematches, or I'm going to get you this, and here's your tangible way back. In that regard, they run it very, very, very much like WWE with storylines. The only difference is we don't actually know who's going to win, right? WWE, won't say it's fake. Those guys work. They know what it is. But I always say the reason I don't think it should be on ESPN SportsCenter, and people argue with me, is because the outcome is determined beforehand. Okay, so in that case, I can't have it on. I need, but in MMA we don't. But White is brilliant. Creating story arcs, creating places for his people, having them, each, even whether you win or lose, we know where the next thing is. It's like one big flow chart that he's just, okay, we come down here, fight. You won, okay, you go over here. You lost, you go over here, but we know all the other ways to get back. It's a strong, centralized hand. I don't think USA Track and Field is a strong, centralized hand in this. And I get it. You got a bunch of independent contractors, and yet golf somehow manages to do it. They have their issues, but I think somehow if USA Track and Field had a stronger way to, I don't want to say it's grip on things because they're independent contractors and I know what they want to say, but if they could offer a way to do that, to build arcs, to build people up, to match things up and have a place to go, create some of that similar thing, I think you could do that. I think it would be marvelous if we could bet on dudes. That'd be awesome, right? I think more than, and I don't know right now enough about it in terms of what DraftKings does or some of these other fantasy places are, or even just, Caesar's Sportsbook by William Hill, which we use. But there's got to be a way that you could do that because people will bet on raindrops going down a window. They're certainly going to bet on that stuff, So in that case, America is degenerate enough in its gaming that they could go for that with track and field. There's no doubt.
Definitely.
You know, so
Well, and I want to play off that a little, John, just because I think that kind of ties in on the sports or on the horse racing side. And I think that, Alex and I talked a little bit about horse racing because we look at it just, take an 800-meter race and whatever a horse race is, 2 miles or what it might be. And it's a race to a finish line, right? And,
that would be a long reference.
Sorry, we don't know horse racing.
You can tell my knowledge of horse racing.
We should bring back. If I interrupt, we should bring back the mile. The mile should be everything. Cut the 1500. Bring me back the mile. Nobody in the world knows. Nobody in the world knows what it means to run 3:34 and break the college record in the 1500. Put me the mile, and I get it. When I tell people that there were 25 guys that ran sub 3:36, and they're like, but if I say, you know what, this year indoor, there were 52 dudes or whatever, I think it was like 39 guys that broke 4 minutes in the mile. They all exactly know what I'm talking about, and their jaw drops. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
I had a bike ride with my buddy the other day who doesn't come from a running background, and I was explaining to him qualifying to the Olympic trials and the times people were running in the 1500. And he was like, "What's the 1500?" And so I had to equate everything to a mile, and then he understood, so it was good. But yeah,
so they call it the metric mile. How about just calling it the freaking mile?
Yeah.
Here, because we want to have you start on the backstretch. I'm sorry, you got me going now. We're going to have you start on the backstretch. We can't see you behind the hammer throwing cage. And then we're going to have you come through halfway so that we're going to have a 700-meter split, which nobody can freaking, push out to what the mile would be. It's the biggest disaster in the entire sport is the 1500. Now I'm going to be quiet because I know what you had to say was really important, and I'm sorry.
Well, it was, I don't know if important's the word. It caused controversy because it's one of these questions, going back to the horse racing analogy, regardless of distance, it's one race, right? And you made the comment of the SEC meet or a big meet being 4 days long, and it's just 21 events, 2 genders. You're talking about 42 events. And you look at, and when I think of, when I watch an 800, and I think of the 2012 800-meter final with Rhodesia and how amazing that was. And I'm like, all right, I think of a horse race and I think of the 800. And I was like, that's one race and I can put my mind around it and I get it. And it makes me think, goes to the question I think is asked within the community sometimes, like, are there too many events in track and field? Or do we try to do too much at one event? And is it set up for a challenge because it's just, to your point earlier about how do we tell a story throughout a competition and help people follow along? How do you tie it all in when you have so much going on?
And I think it's easier, and they've done that to some degree with the Diamond League, where we have some events in this one, so we can package it to a little 2-hour thing. You come in and watch it, and I think that works terrifically. I don't think I need to see every event every time. Give me a reason to try to go to another event, right? Okay. I don't think I like how they did it where they're like, okay, guess what? Triple jump, no longer a Diamond League event, right?
Yeah.
Bump that down. So I think we can do that, but I think we can, by the way, the number of SportsCenter anchors that knew that they that they toyed with the triple jumpers here is probably me. And then after that, the list very, very short. But I think, we can do that. Here, we're going to have some of this. We're going to have 100, but we're not going to have a 200. We're not going to have some of these. Hang on. I'm going to have to tell my son to hold off on a minute. And I don't know how to do this on my fancy phone. So bear with me as this thing is going through. Hang on. There we go. Anyway, yeah. Who knows? We could have had a scoop there on the Arkansas track. But I think
Coach Harder
when it comes to the big meets like that, I think everybody should have their opportunity. You should do that. And if it's a team thing over 4 days, I get it's okay. It's just a matter of how do we, offer enough compelling things on those 4 days that people are watching. Even if we shrink it down some, it becomes a little more palatable. I wouldn't change it. I find the NCAA meets hard enough that I don't think it gives a true representation of how strong your team is. Right, that Georgia will finish 10th in the conference and a top 3 in the nation. That's a misnomer. I had somebody at Missouri one time said, how about our track team? We were in the top 10 there at indoor. Our gals, we were 8th. I said, we had one gal twice. Right? That's no indication of how strong your team is. We had one. God bless Carissa. She won twice. Here you go. We're in the top 20. So I think for the normal everyday, we should, if I'm trying to get pro track done, I like how it's done now. I think there's room for all the events. I wouldn't discount some like they did with the triple jump. I think every one of those has value. I think you just got to structure it a little bit. And where I miss things, that's great. Let's have another meet nearby, close by. Let's pair those up so that I can go see both those if I want to, or here's Eugene 1 and Eugene 2, whatever it is, because it's hard if I'm in Omaha to get to Eugene and get to, get out to the track in New York. But I feel like there's a way you could probably handle that. In terms of national ones, I get how they're trying to get it all done. Track at the Olympics and the trials makes more sense because we're trying to maximize, especially in the Olympics, we're trying to maximize over those 2 weeks. And in addition to seeing team handball and gymnastics, now I can offer you a little track every night. And because it's good, I can keep people around because I'm going to keep telling you, hey, here comes, whoever is the next guy, come see Karsten or come see Van Newkirk or all these guys, Niekirk. But in terms of the NCAA, I don't know how, and you're never going to get coaches to come off that. That's going to be really hard. It was hard enough to get them to do it on 2 different dates. But I think it makes it easier to keep track of who's winning what. So I do like that. I think we could condense it some. We spent an awful lot of time waiting around the last 2 weeks or last weekend on times. And I get it. If it means that somebody doesn't get to double back, oh, well. If that's the case. And I get it. You can't have the steeplechase and the 5K and a 10K all in one night because now we're doing a lot of, nothing. I don't know. Could you run the 10K and could you run the 100 meters? Because like Texas A&M had an infield like that. Could you run it? I don't know. There's a chance the way they ran out afterwards to the finish line that you could bury some poor Kenyan or some little guy from, the South Dakota distance runner. We don't want to do that, right?
Hey, now.
You actually might have just created a viewership opportunity.
But you can do some other, because we can do field events simultaneously when you do other things. But I do think you could shrink that down. I thought we were out there for 4 hours and you could have easily put it down to an hour. But this is how sometimes coaches are hard because they've got it prepared, they've got it set. This is what we're going to do, and suddenly instead of having 6 heats of the 400, we only have 2. But we're still going to wait then the next 11 minutes that we would have used there till we start. How about no? Here's next. Boom. Who's up next? Let's go. So I think even in there, you could stop wasting some time to make it quicker. And that would help along the way. But, there are some things that are inherent. There are some things that are inherently always going to be difficult. And if you want to have 21 events, that's going to inherently be difficult in what you have to do.
Yeah.
There's just no way around.
Well, it's good conversation, always good conversation. I think it's a conversation that will continue. It's been going on for years, will continue going for years. Just in how can we refine things and it doesn't have to be one size fits all every time, but how can we help mold it into opportunities for people to really get excited about what's going on. But we could go on for hours with that, I'm sure. I want to transition back out a little bit before we let you go from the track and field side. You've been at ESPN, as you said, for 22 years. Your time, I think, comes after. I looking at the kind of the benchmarks or transitions in ESPN's history. It's owned by ABC. ABC is owned by Disney, and those were kind of probably benchmarks throughout history. I saw that ESPN was owned by Getty Oil before ABC, things that I didn't even know.
Yep.
But But all that to say, just, the lifespan of a company, there's so many moments and waves and growth, and especially in the last 10 years, pivots in technology.
Mhm.
Where are there significant points for you that you remember since being at ESPN where it was a significant growth or change, or just kind of a impactful time that you were like, wow, we're living in a really unique moment through what we're doing?
Well, the first one in the company history, though I was not here for, was when they got the NFL the first time. And before that, SportsCenter was great, but they showed, as terms of programming, they showed a lot of lumberjack competitions and cross country meets. Right, that was the heyday of cross country. It was on ESPN a lot back in the day. Personally, I remember the first time I got to I did a Super Bowl after when the Buccaneers and Gruden beat the Raiders, and I did the post Super Bowl SportsCenter with Dan Patrick, and I took a deep breath and I thought, I'm pretty sure this is about as good as my career is ever going to get. Like, I feel like, okay, I've mounted. In terms of us, just as a company in time of those dates, the onset of what we did with ESPN.com was huge, because it enabled growth. And like I said, we were one of the first to really go all in on that. We didn't care as long as people were watching, putting stuff on ESPN3 and the internet. Most recently, this ESPN Plus is crazy. And you talk about people that were owning us, right? So originally it was Getty had a chance, then ABC, and ABC wasn't really, it was kind of Cap Cities. And even now, Disney only owns 80% of ESPN. I don't know if you knew that. Hearst Corporation owns 20 as well. And there was some talk around here that they were going to spin us off, that because we were not making $400 million a year, and we were making less than that, we were less valuable, and maybe somebody would scoop us up, right? And all along came ESPN Plus and Disney Plus, and now we are hugely valuable again. And there's no way they'll sell off Donald Duck before they sell off us when they come through here. So I'm trying to think of significant things like that were developments, and oddly enough, most of them weren't linear TV things. It was the constant, how do we keep relevant as things change? For the longest time, we held on to cable about as long as we could. And we serviced our cable subscribers unbelievable. They were the ones that got free access to things that were on the internet. And then we realized that you couldn't survive that way anymore. And so now it became ESPN Plus, and it became all those things. So I don't know in terms of where super mile markers are in terms of the company and growth. I just know that, boy, for a while when we started, adding more and more live events, that we just kept growing and growing. And, suddenly we couldn't have the Christmas dinner party, which we used to, rent out a place here, and there were still 1,000 people, but then all of a sudden, on site we had 5,000 people. Or you'd go to the family night at Lake Compounce over here across the street with the country's oldest wooden roller coaster. And it used to be, right, it was a nice, happy, kind of felt family-ish. You didn't have to wait an hour and a half in line for something like Disney World. And then also we had so many people, and you're like, wait a minute, I could go to Disney and stand in line for a lot of this. So, where all that stuff falls, it just, for a while, it was just epic growth. In my case, there wasn't, I'm not sure, a full one. It was just, more rights. Baseball came along, and we made choices. We kind of had to let the NHL go. And then we increased football, and we got the playoff, and people went all in on college football playoffs. And so there were any number of things where this company just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I'm lucky. I've been here for about almost half of, in that case, more than half. I got here just as we were starting the 20th thing. And I think we just caught the wave of growth. I was on, just in general, it was the explosion of being here at the right time. A lot of those things were in place, and then they just blossomed. And so it was more of that, the seeds that were planted before I got here, that became gigantic.
It almost seems like right now could be one of the biggest milestones and the biggest inflection points. It's like, we consume media in such a different way, and now ESPN isn't, it's not adhering to a 24-hour schedule. There's no little cup or box that you have to fit in. The aperture is every audience, every sport. And so I think, every media platform is kind of facing this.
And to that end, just real quickly, when John Stripper was here, John Stripper was the guy who was like, listen, anymore, we can't put the Australian Open on and just tape delay it. The Australian Open has to be played and shown in real time. And if people really love tennis, we can do it. Now we can rebroadcast it. Here's your encore presentation, which is great. And maybe we add a few more viewers. But, when Serena Williams is playing and it happens to be at 2 a.m, you can't hold that from people anymore because people are going to see it. So I think that's one of the dynamic changes is that live has got to be live. And that'll be great to see what happens with, NBC in Tokyo with them being 13 hours ahead. How you gonna skin that cat? Because I'm willing to turn my days and nights upside down, to watch Donovan Brazier run in the 800 and watch Rai Benjamin run in the 400, intermediates. Those people make me change their schedule.
We should probably start sleep training now. John, because of we mentioned the aperture of all the things, all the sports, all the things that are on the plate that ESPN could chase. I wonder what's the weirdest, or I guess what is the most challenging or most intimidating assignment that's ever been put on your desk that you might have said, "Woof, that is outside my comfort zone"?
Well, that's one nice thing is they're really good about that in that, we try to play for some strength. They've never said, John, we're going to need you to hang out and do La Liga today. And so I have avoided that. What's really funny is how you think you follow, like hockey is a great example. I think I'm following hockey. I'm watching. I know who's in the all Canadian division and the things they've done. And I know most of the stars, but what you don't realize is through the entire season, because I work so much with Levy and Bucci-Gross and they're so passionate about hockey, is that they have every highlight. And all of a sudden I'm going to show up tonight and neither of them are here. And all of a sudden I'm going to have the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'm like, holy crap. I haven't really called any of these guys I haven't been an active participant and and so then all of a sudden you see names that but you're like, wait, and makes it even worse because they'll put a phonetic spelling in and you're used to seeing it just, like Nikolai Habibulin only screws me up if you would show a phonetic spelling. I don't need that, Haile Gebrselassie, if you gave me a phonetic spelling, I wouldn't be able to say his name because you're used to just saying it, right? But so that always really alarming. So sometimes it's just the most average thing that you take for granted, but you realize you haven't done any of it when it comes through. So I don't think there's any really giant one that I've ever been saddled with. I'm really fortunate in that. And like I said, they kind of try to play to your strengths. So I'm glad that I don't have, men's lacrosse coming up anytime soon. Because that would be one, but I've never had one where I've just completely balked at it and said, hey, you need to have the wrong, you've got the wrong, guy. I did, when we did 50 and 50, I had to do a foosball tournament. But luckily, I spent some time in bars, so I was okay with that, even though it's not something that's in your everyday day job. That was probably one of the strangest things I did in 50 and 50, but I've been really lucky. I haven't done that, and I've never been like Levy and messed up bulging disc that he's tried to get away from for 20 years. And let's hope for another, 13 months, I'm knocking on wood, that I'm in the same situation, that I don't encounter anything. If I could, when my time here is done, if they could just went, I remember that guy, he was okay, I'd take that. I'm totally Midwestern enough that if he was pretty good, then I'll take that. If I don't have any drastic highlight reel where they go, remember this, I'll be good with that. I'll totally be with that.
John, last question that I have for you. You said that you don't consider yourself one of the OGs. You mentioned a few people that you had the opportunity to work with when you started that was really cool opportunities at that time. Who would you point to? I'll give you up to two, but you gotta narrow it a little bit. That you really looked up to or really learned a lot from, whether it was when you first got going or just throughout your time
You
at
mean
ESPN.
strictly here? Strictly here?
Yeah, we'll go strictly
Right?
here.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think that Vic Lombardi that I worked with in Phoenix probably moves the needle for people. Although he was great, Denver down was as good as local television anybody. I will always remember Dan Patrick was really helpful. In one time, he came up to me. I'd been here a few months, and he said, "John, I think you're pretty good. I think you could be here a while. I would just offer you this. It's kind of okay to die with one in the bank. You don't have to say or try to be the funniest guy on every highlight every time. Not that what you don't say is funny, but people will remember 3 things and 10 things they won't remember any." Right. So that was a really, really sound piece of advice. And then after that, probably as much as I enjoy Kenny, as much as I enjoy Butchie and Steve Levy, after that, I kind of look and think of when I grow up in life, if I could be Reese Davis, that would be really awesome. I think Reese is pretty much the gold standard in anything you would like to do, whether it's anchor SportsCenter, whether it would be play-by-play for a game, whether it is to host a live event or host studio. I don't think we have a more talented person here. And on top of that, he is so disgustingly nice that it's, at some point you're like, well, that he can't be that nice. That's sort of awful. And then you find out he is, and you're like, well, now I feel like I should hate him. But he really is. He's just a decent guy. And Levy's very much like that, right? There's not a thing that Steve Levy isn't good at, right? Steve Levy could be your decathlete because he can do a little bit of all of it. And he wouldn't even come in and run like a 5, 10, 1500. He'd have a respectable time in that too. So he's really good. So, but Dan Patrick for that piece of advice, which was great. And you kind of got an idea that like as big as that guy was, he knew every night he had to do the show like he did it the first time. He was committed to it. He didn't ever go, well, I'm Dan Patrick. I'll just, hand it to me and I'll read the score, which was great. And then, Leaves and RD are the same. But Reese is just, top drawer.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah. I mean, it's folks that
let's do shows together after a while, because we just got too sideways. So, Scotty's terrific. That's one nice thing, right? I've had no duds. I've never worked with a dud here, which is amazing. At least of all the names that you guys would know, and the ones that weren't around long enough for people to know. And I've been here at the right time and it just happened about 2 years ago. It happened on a Sunday. He came back and I got to do a Sunday night with Oberman. So I've also been able to work with pretty much everybody here that was of note. I did a 6 o'clock with Charlie Steiner. I did one with Larry Beal. Did one with Jack Edwards, did one, a Super Bowl with Dan and some other shows, and Stuart and Rich. And so I did get here, even though I'm not quite OG, I've been able to work with almost all of the major people here, like I never did it. Well, I was gonna say, and I never really anchored a show with Bob Lee, but now that I think about it, I did the night Muhammad Ali died. It was Bob and I and Scott Van Pelt for, Jesus, I don't know. We were on from whatever it was, 11:30 or midnight till 4:30 in the morning. So I could say even that I did SportsCenter with him. So I've been fortunate. I got a lot of notches in my belt, man.
Yeah. Well, it's cool. I mean, not just being someone that grew up watching SportsCenter, all the folks you mentioned, yourself, but as 2 guys, Alex and myself, that have had fortunate opportunity to bring some news and coverage of a sport to a community like track and field. We obviously, learned a lot from watching SportsCenter, watching ESPN as we grew up. And so those names and yourself that you mentioned are people that we regard really highly. So it's an honor to have you on. It's really cool to talk about those experiences and how some of those folks have had an influence on you. So we appreciate you joining and appreciate you, as you described, being a guy on SportsCenter that puts an effort into a sport that we love, and also being in Bristol and making sure people that don't know it get to see it. So,
right. Well, I appreciate it. You guys are very kind. Ryan, obviously, you and I have interacted more often. I think the world of you and what you guys do. I've had sort of sibling pain when I watch you in 7 parkas, freezing your ass off, in Terre Haute, Indiana, cross country championships and the like when you go through there. But and I'll say this, Alex, because you're saying South Dakota State, you're in the national championship game, and I couldn't help you because twice I laid Clemson national title game tickets on your man Fenton there. Gratis, here, go enjoy the game. But if I'd have known before, I would have tried to help out. But the problem was I didn't think Clemson was going to go every freaking year, and that there'd be this kind of. Slow down a little, Dabo. Why don't you give somebody else a shot for a change? My goodness.
I know. John thought that was a one-time favor, and then it was like, hey, John,
right.
What are you doing this year?
Right. He thought it was a one-time favor too. He didn't know they were going back every year. Are you kidding? He's like, we're going to this national championship game every year. We keep giving the offensive coordinator $400,000 pops every year, and suddenly you tell me you got no room for a track and field team? What's going on out there? How about we build one less side in the football building, and we decide to go ahead and let the other 85 kids out there go ahead and run around the track some. My goodness.
It's okay. There's a cool slide in the football office, right? It's all fun and games.
Right. We need a slide in the football. We got a mini golf course in there too, but we got no monies left over for relay batons.
Oh gosh. Well,
thanks,
John. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, really, really good to see you. So have a good one, and all the best to you.
I'm going to go type SportsCenter. Thanks, fellas.
John Anderson joining the show, Al. Always good conversation with him. And, I do think, I know for me, I think for you, just like the ESPN, the SportsCenter connection, his kind of love and transition into having track as part of it, just and our worlds colliding with track and sports broadcasting. It was a very personal episode just to be like, this is a guy that I watched and kind of always respected and was entertained by. And so to having a relationship with him now, to having him on the show and kind of speaking about his experience was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, combining our two worlds, right? You talk about track and field, but then also like the world of sports journalism, right? And like that's something I really, really like. I think has like shaped how I view even humor, right? Like humor and creativity. Yeah. And so when we got him talking about like the tone of how like his generation delivered sports, and then like paralleling that with the way like Stuart Scott delivered, I was in heaven there. Like I could chat about that all day because I think it just shaped so much of like sports and like, I don't want to just say male humor, but like our generation is like that tone that his team like did, like this is SportsCenter, like that drove humor for a generation. And I still think it like made a huge lasting impact on the way people deliver news, sports, and any sort of storylines on television. Oh
yeah. I mean, when we would do our Run Junkie show, we did This Is Flow Track commercials, like all those things are really born out of what John and the guys at ESPN have done for years, and that humor and that involvement with not just the personalities on, that they are on TV, but then mixing that with who the athletes are and those personalities. And so how they bring the news and the highlights together and then actually combine those relationships into real relationships and some comedy and some fun and, all those things. So it was really cool. But I think one of the things that I think we talked about it with him and just, I commented on it again. John's a track fan, right? He's into it. He is not just a ESPN guy that got handed a track assignment. He's a track athlete that happens to be an ESPN guy and really cares and wants to bring attention to it, wants to help make the stars outside of just people that know track. And I think that's obviously rare when you're talking about major networks to have someone like that internally. And it was interesting to hear him say, like, sometimes I'm actually better suited not being at the event because I can help get it out on SportsCenter and out to the masses by being the guy that can actually talk about it. And and it's a really good point, a really interesting point versus him having to call it in to someone that doesn't know how to talk about the high jump, and then they just pass on it.
Right. Yeah, we need him there, right? Like I'm grateful that he is there. And I think him, like again, like he's a track guy who's also a broadcaster, right? He's and I think that came out in the way he delivered all of his passion, even when he and sometimes like we need people like in his position to like put a foot down, right? Like, hey, the mile. It's the mile. I'm sorry, but it's going to be the mile. And you know what? We can do our what is it, a pearl clutching, right? We can wring our hands and pearl clutch about the tradition of track and field, blah blah blah. But guys, we got to eat it. It's the mile. Sorry, like this is what if we were actually serious about making track and field more approachable, we got to do it. And like I don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? And I appreciate him because he's the authority.
Yeah. And I said it in the show. Like I literally had that conversation with a non-track fan yesterday and had to explain what that was, right? And so it's a real thing. So I think give a shout out to our guys that do bring back the mile. I think John coined their phrase right in the show, bring back the mile. So it was great to see. But I think that's like, one of the other things he said that I think, it's good for everything, even outside of just track and field, but really hit home was, let's not miss the 3-foot putt, meaning let's not forget to do the little things. It's cool to have big ideas and have these grandiose ways that, we can think we can improve or change or whatever it might be, but let's not forget the little thing, the lap counter on the screen to let people know how many laps are left or whatever it might be in a long race, right? I think that was just a really good reminder for all of us to, when we have ideas and we want to do things, let's not overthink, and let's make sure we're pushing things forward, moving the ball down the court.
100%. So, yeah, I think we need to like break as a track and field community. Like we want to put the sport out there, right? And so we can debate about what we need to be prioritizing, how we deliver it, but there are a few things that I think we can all agree on. And those ideas need to come to the forefront and like, let's put everybody in the same room, right? Because we can all agree that matchups matter, right? Like relevancy and like, these 3-foot putt sort of analogies matter. So let's bring those forward. Let's all get together and agree on that. And let's push this thing forward because there's some things that matter and we can make this more approachable to more people. And we're going to take those conversations up, put them in front of everybody, take them outside beneath the grandstand and put them on the forefront. But we appreciate you guys joining us again. This is season 2. If you haven't yet, check out our first episode with Mr. Tinker Hatfield. Really fun episode talking about the future of stadiums and the future of shoe design. So check that out and more to come. But for this week, we thank you and we'll see you next time beneath the grandstand.